the Law Women Association at UCLA. I'm a 2L, and I'm also the lead liaison for the group, so shout out to Lee for putting on this amazing event today. Kind of just a quick reminder, if you need the MCLE credit materials, they're going to be up here and you can grab them anytime. It's going to be the full pack of everything. You're getting a ton to look at. So you're going to take they're all laid out kind of in this way. You're going to take this full stack of papers. We can help you hand them out at the end and also answer some of your questions if you have them. The people who will be better able to help you are outside at a table in the front. If you haven't signed up for the MCLE credit yet, you can still do so. They'll be there at the end of the event, so you can feel free to head on out there afterwards, or if you've already checked in with them, also great. No problem.
They're all for me.
Yes, very resourceful.
And then I'd love to introduce our amazing panel, along with Jill, who is actually the president of Law Women and Real at UCLA. So starting us off on the far end, we have Danielle Katzir.
Sorry, I just made a connection.
She is a partner in Gibson Dunn's real estate group, and she is actually also a double Bruin, JD and Anderson, so we'd love to see a Bruin coming back to support. And then notably, in her distinguished real estate career, she is responsible for helping to bring the Rams home and build their stadium, which is awesome.
We'll see how the season goes.
All right, and our lovely panelists that we have here. First, we have Judge Debra Archuleta, who was elected to the LA County Superior Court in 2016. She currently works in the Edmund D. Edelman Children's Court handling juvenile dependency and adoptions. Prior to becoming a judge, she served as LA Deputy District Attorney for 25 years, handling thousands of cases and trying over 150 of those cases. She spent most of her career prosecuting cases involving domestic violence, homicide, sexual assault, child abuse, gang violence, and white-collar crime. She attended community college before receiving her BA in economics from UC Irvine, and she earned her JD from Western State College of Law in Fullerton while working full-time as a law clerk at the Florida DA's office. In her spare time, she was visiting Descanso Gardens, reading about American history, and playing pickleball with her family. And as I was told, her most important part of her resume is being Alyssa's mom.
Okay, she wrote that bio. After it was not true, but thank you, Alyssa, for what you
Next up, we have Shantel Vachani, who is a triple Bruin, very exciting. She's a managing attorney in the LA office with the Young Center for Immigrant Children's Rights, an organization dedicating to advocating for the best interests of unaccompanied immigrant children in immigrant detention. She has extensive professional experience providing holistic legal and social work advocacy to youth in the foster and juvenile justice systems. Prior to joining the Young Center, she worked as a clinical assistant professor at the USC Suzanne Dork Peck School of Social Work in the Children, Youth, and Families Department, where she taught policy and clinical practice courses to aspiring social workers, including social work in the law, working with transitioning youth, and advocacy for justice-impacted youth. Shantel has also worked as a children's rights attorney in the Children's Rights Project at the Public Counsel Law Center, where she provided holistic social work and legal advocacy for youth transitioning out of foster care. Following law school, she was a SOAR's fellow and education attorney at the Learning Rights Law Center, where she developed and directed a multidisciplinary project called the School to Prison Pipeline Reversal Project, aimed at preventing youth with special needs from being pushed out of the educational system and into the juvenile justice system as a result of disability-related behaviors. She received a joint law degree, master's in social work from UCLA Law and UCLA School of Social Welfare, respectively. And last but not least, we have Marisa Muma, who is the Director of Disaster Relief at Baby to Baby, a nonprofit organization that provides essentials to children living in poverty and those in the wake of disaster. In this role, she oversees strategic planning in all 50 states, striving to take a human rights-based approach to humanitarian action. She directs the design, implementation, and evaluation of Baby to Baby's comprehensive programming that serves over 1 million children annually through partnerships with local organizations, hospitals, schools, government agencies, and more. Notable efforts include working with the USAID and the Department of Homeland Security on Operation Allies Welcome to ensure a dignified and child-focused response for newly arrived Afghan refugees. Additionally, Marisa launched the New York State Cares Plus Baby to Baby Diaper Bank, an initiative with the Governor of New York providing over 20 million diapers to vulnerable children. Prior to joining Baby to Baby, Marisa served as a child protection officer in refugee camps in southern Rwanda. She provided technical support for programs for 20,000 children, including early childhood education, learning through play, and WASH, and helped strengthen child protection information and data management systems. She also spent time at the United Nations, where she contributed to advocacy work on the rights of children in humanitarian contexts and monitored the work of the General Assembly and Secretary Council. She's thrilled to be back at UCLA Law to meet fellow changemakers and those who are passionate about children's rights.
Okay, so it's so nice to be back. It's nice to see everybody. It's great to be up here with these incredible women who are doing unbelievable work. It's just from everybody's bios. I'm just looking out of the audience, and I feel like you're in one of two camps here. You either are totally envious of the student lounge and what it looks like now, or you would never believe me if I showed you a picture of what the student lounge looked like when we were here. So I feel like leave it up to you to guess which is which. Yeah.
Should we have them raise their hands if they are?
Oh, I can tell. I'll find a picture of that red couch for everybody. But I just wanted to kind of start with an easy one, but I think a meaningful one. We just heard everybody's kind of formal bios, but each of you has had really interesting career arcs that have been sort of less than linear, and I find that with career paths like that, when you still stay so anchored to serving this population, it's really driven by something deeply held and personal and that you're passionate about. So maybe if you could share in no particular order kind of with our audience what drives you to this work and keeps you here working in children's advocacy.
You're talking to me?
Oh, by the way, I have permission to call her Debra, so nobody get upset with me because I asked you now.
You know, I'm a judge, but I feel so like lowly and unaccomplished compared to all of these lofty panelists that I'm sitting here with today. Well, I am in the Children's Dependency Court. I'm starting my third year there, and I was a prosecutor and in the office for about 28 years, actually. I had no idea when I was in the DA's office and I was prosecuting child abuse, sexual abuse, domestic violence homicide. The crossover of what happens to the children when I would do the domestic violence case and I prosecute the batterer for battering the typically woman, but not always. Whatever happened to the kids? That wasn't part of my purview. Those were confidential proceedings. And now that I'm sitting over there in children's court, I'm like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And now we're sitting over here during the pandemic where we have children that have not been in school for 2 years. They've not been to the pediatrician in 2 years. And that extra set of eyes that we typically would have, whether it's scout leaders, team coaches, teachers, doctors, etc., youth leaders, YMCA programs, we don't have that extra set of eyes on these vulnerable children. And I have to tell you, it shocked me to the core. So we deal with children that are, frankly, I am seeing children every week born with positive tox screens for methamphetamine and fentanyl. Okay, this fentanyl crisis that we're all reading about and hearing about in the news is a real thing. And every week I'm signing removal orders to take children, babies, that are born with positive tox with fentanyl in their system at the time of birth. We work with children between birth and 18 years of age, but then we have something called non-minor dependents, which are no longer minors because they're 18, but they get to remain in our system under certain circumstances where the courts do work with them to get them job training, permanent homes, adoption, and college, depending on whatever dynamic they present. But we have a lot of children that, we have 35,000 children under the auspices now of the Department of Children and Family Services, but frankly that number could easily be doubled if we just had more eyes and ears and feelers out into the community. So I just used to be in my silo in the prosecutorial world, and then I got over to the children's court world, and it just blew my mind. So after about the first week, I went home to my daughter and I said, you were so lucky you have me as a mother. Because I was a tough mother. I was a tough mother, and now when I get these kids in front of me in front of the court, I'm kind of a tough mother for them because I have to be like a mother. And I'm trying to teach these children that anything is possible, anything. But they need to be accountable and know that there are consequences for their actions. And even though our children are dependents and we don't criminalize them in any way. We offer them a variety of services, of support, of tutoring. They need orthodontia, they get it. They need mental health, they get it. Whatever these children need, they get it. We have the resources to provide for them, but I'm also trying to teach them that they can't go through life expecting that everything's going to be handed to them, that they're going to have to at some point accept responsibility and work for it. We also have a lot of children, more males than females, that are both in the criminal, they don't call it criminal anymore, they call it juvenile justice system, where they are committing crimes while they are also foster children. We have children in placements. We have children that are transgender children that need special housing. We have children that have mental health issues, that have substance abuse issues, that have parents in prison, that have parents that use drugs, the parents that abuse each other in front of the children. So the whole gamut of human experience is watched by some very traumatized children. Starting at the age of 2 or 3, these children, many of them are in homes where there is abuse, drug abuse, physical abuse in the form of domestic violence, there's homelessness, there's mental health disorders, and it's impacting the most vulnerable in our community. And I mean, I'm kind of ashamed to say how ignorant I was about this, but I've been so immersed in it for the last 3 years, it just like shocks me to the core. So when we're done with the panel, of course, if anybody has any questions about any of it, I'm happy to answer those questions. I'm thrilled that some of you are here today and interested, because frankly, our children are our future. And none of you would be sitting in this room today if someone didn't love you up, support you, pave the way for you, either financially, emotionally, put you in timeout, or, applauded you when you got your academic achievement award. So none of you and none of us would be sitting up here if someone didn't love you up. Many of you probably have stories that could have been in my courtroom. But if we work hard and overcome and work for the common and collective good, we can end up in amazing places and frankly have amazing impact in the world. So.
Can I add a redirect, actually? I realize we're a little shorter on time than we thought we were going to be, so this is a perfect blend, though, because you mentioned there's your official role, and then there's sort of the role you inhabit as kind of this mother judge.
Right.
But
Mother superior.
Mother superior. I bet. So who is your, just for the group, kind of, who is your client, if there is one? For whom do you vigorously advocate? Who are you representing? What is the dependency? Dependency court is sort of a special place, right? In it's sort of its own unique creature.
Well, we have ladles, which they represent the parents. So every parent, mother and father, each have their own lawyer. If you have a mother and a father, or sometimes you have 2 mothers, sometimes you have 2 fathers. Each parent gets their own lawyer. Each child gets sometimes they share lawyers, sometimes they don't. So like if I have a young girl, this happens a lot, who's like 13 or 14, and she's sexually abused by mom's boyfriend or the stepfather or somebody else, and then we have, say, younger boys that are part of the same sibling group, they might have a separate lawyer because the girl's interests legally are different from the younger brother's interests, so they would have separate lawyers. So every parent has an attorney provided free of charge. Every child is represented by counsel. Then you have the Department of Children and Family Services, which is sort of, I don't want to call them the prosecutorial agency, but they're the one that bring the allegations. And county counsel represents the Department of Children and Family Services. So Department of Children and Family Services, as the government agency, is actually the client, and they're represented by county counsel in my courtroom. So sometimes I can have 6, 7, 8 lawyers, depending on the number of children in the court in each particular case. Then I, as the judge, I can't advocate for anybody, even though I'm rooting for the children and trying to make sure that they're placed and stable and cared for. I have to sit there. I can't take sides, but I always have to do what's in the best interest of the child. And I know we have a handout on that, and I'm sure it's going to be a very compelling read.
That's a perfect segue.
Thank you for that. Perfect segue.
Do you want me to just combine those 2 questions?
Yes, perfect.
So just by a show of hands, because I know, how many of you are students? Okay, so I'm going to switch to the student pathway, because I think it's really important. And I took immigration law in this class. Sat right there. And I remember thinking,
I'm sure.
I had a tough teacher. I did get an A, but I worked hard in that one. But I took it as a 3L, so if you guys are 3Ls, it's different than a 1L. So just a little bit to answer your first question about kind of how children's rights, white children's rights. I think growing up early on, I'm Indian by background, and we would go to India every year, and so I would, see things and not understand them, and I never understood this concept of absolute versus relative poverty until I would go there, and as an 8-year-old, 4-year-old, 2-year-old, and then throughout my life. So I had all these things imprinted, and so I knew I wanted to do something that was going to be something, and so I thought my path was international human rights. My grandfather worked for the United Nations, and so that was my plan. And so I went in with the idea of international human rights after undergrad here. I was an international development studies major, went to live in India, to work in India, to do all of this stuff, and I had so many impactful moments there about things that were outside of my control. But one thing that I realized in most of it, even though I was doing teaching and social work and things like that, that so much of it, what was missing was the ability to then do any sort of systemic change. So I came in with the idea of international human rights policy systems change. Hasn't completely changed, and sorry, I gave you a lot of reading, but they told me for MCLE, so you have a lot of reading there that kind of gets at that. But when I came to law school, my first year, I was a public interest law program, a COPE student and a CRS student, came in with that idea. First internship in the summer, I split it, thought maybe civil rights law if I went domestic, or international human rights. So I went to the UN for half of the summer, second half. So I was kind of just figuring it out, and I did the rule out method. And then I realized when I was doing all of that work that all of the work that I was doing on the international level could be done in my own community, and it could be done in the way that maybe would be more accommodating to the life that I wanted to have. So moving forward, I did a lot of other things during that time, took a lot of clinics, lots of immigration stuff and lots of children's rights things, but I couldn't quite figure out, but the one thing I knew that I loved was the children, and specifically the children's rights advocacy piece. I was also, got my master's in social work, and so I would take half my classes here and then I would run across the other way and do it. And it was a little bit chaotic because I'd, take business associations, and then I'd go learn about trauma-informed care and like therapy, and I was like, so I went the macro social work path with like systems change, policy, nonprofit management, that kind of stuff, and mixed it together. And so I've, all the jobs that I've had since then have been kind of, how do you merge these two systems or areas of study, social work and law. And so when I got out of law school, there was nothing, because it just didn't really exist, and so I was able to create my own and kind of bring systems together. And so when I was working in the school to prison pipeline, I was an education attorney because I had to be a lawyer of some sort, and so, but I was in the delinquency system, placed inside of a mental health agency, working for a nonprofit law firm. And so being able to put all those things, I think, has been the trajectory of, you don't have to do just one area, but the central theme has been children-centered, trauma-informed, lawyering, social work, advocacy. So a lot of different things moving forward. When I worked in dependency, I worked as a third-party advocate at public counsel, going into dependency and advocating, and then moving on to different areas, juvenile justice, dependency, and to where I'm at now. So I think the moral of that was, you don't have to exactly know, but something, your mission, your North Star of guiding you is something that has been really helpful for me. Like, I knew no matter what, it was going to be about the kids. And for a brief stint, I was worked for CTA, California Teachers Association, because education was my thing. I was an education attorney, and I realized I couldn't feel comfortable there because I wasn't advocating for the kids. And so that's how I switched from teacher's side to children's rights. So all that to say, that's the central theme. And what I'm doing now and who I'm serving now, I work at the Young Center for Immigrant Children's Rights. Has anyone heard of it? All right. We are a national organization. We started in 2004 to serve unaccompanied immigrant children. And I think more recently we've seen a lot in the news, seen the horrendous pictures of detention facilities, and I have many crossover youth that have crossed into multiple systems. And so the population that I'm serving is the unaccompanied immigrant children from all countries. We've currently serving over kids from 100 countries. We're a national organization. We have 8 offices. I am the managing attorney for the West Coast in our Los Angeles office, and we service all of the shelters and facilities, long-term foster cares. It's essentially a federal foster care system. There's a shelter system, and then there's a federal kind of foster care system for kids that don't have anyone else. Most of those kids will get sponsored out to family members, about 90% of them actually, so those are not the kids that become my clients, those are the kids that eventually become in your courtroom that I also work with. Yeah, and those are very complicated. So if we had more time, I could share lots of stories about the intersection of all those systems.
I'll prompt you for that though.
Yeah, but for now, I think unaccompanied children from all over, and what we see is as foreign policy changes, as natural and unnatural disasters happen, we see trends. Right now, it's Ukrainians, Afghan youth, kids from Somalia, wherever there is war, wherever there are natural disasters, that's who we're seeing, and those are the kids. And so I did provide you a lot, since I know we're not going to get into it, to how children end up there and under what are the federal kind of laws that allow them, what are the protections that they have, and then when it's our time, I'll share maybe some examples of what it looks like, and I'm happy to connect. And I'm also here to say that we do have a volunteer program. We love law students and lawyers, especially 2Ls and 3Ls, but anyone really over the age of 21 that's bilingual. We would love to have you, and your volunteer opportunity is you actually are the one who directly works with the youth. You go into the detention facility. You have the relationship with the child, not as a lawyer, but as a human. And so that's really what it looks like. Which is much more important, because then I'm here to do all the government stuff and go into the government staffies and do all the reports and file everything, and they also have immigration attorneys. So it's a pretty complex system for these children, but sometimes we see it on the news and it's sensationalized. And sometimes we have no idea how and where. And I worked in dependency and delinquency and did immigration law stuff at public counsel, and I didn't even know about this niche group of kids in the Office of Refugee Resettlement, unaccompanied minors, and how it worked. And that, I don't know how I missed that for 10 years. So it's very easy to miss, but I'm here to tell you all about it if you want to know about it more after today.
Thank you.
Shantel.
So again, I'm Marisa. I am the director of Archuleta at Baby to Baby. And I grew up as an expat overseas, mainly in Bangkok, Thailand, and I think that's what really jump-started my interest in international relations. I was volunteering a lot in the community with children, even something like teaching dance classes to kids in local slums or things like that, and kind of carried that with me through undergrad. So I think originally I was sort of on a similar path to Shantel, and I thought that I wanted to go into international relations and advocacy work, but I quickly realized that I was very results-oriented, and that really the better career path for me was something that allowed me to have more of an immediate impact in communities. So I started to look at careers in the aid world, which is sort of this small niche field that can be, I think at times, a little bit secretive. There's not many people that really pursue careers in aid, and it was hard for me to figure out what that would look like outside of the UN or that policy advocacy side of things. But when I was an undergrad, I quickly realized majority of people in aid work either had a PhD or their JD or multiple masters. So I decided to go to law school and see if I could kind of build that career for myself. So I took the international human rights approach to humanitarian action work. It's a sort of a new field that has come about in the past probably 15 years that has shifted aid work from a need-based approach to a rights-based approach. And we see this play out in multiple different ways. But the path that I chose to take was specifically with children. I think that is sort of always where my heart really was. I'm not quite sure why, but that's just where my work led me. So I started in refugee camps, mainly focusing on child protection work. I think a lot of that relates in kind of like a quick and dirty way to the work that the other panelists do in terms of best interest assessments, but instead you're doing that with no internet, no email, no phone calls, no cars, no formal system, and really no way to track even like where a child's from or their parents or where they were born or how old they are. So part of that job, a big part of it is resource allocation. So let's say I have 5 mattresses available today, but there's 400 kids who need a mattress. Where do those go and how do you decide that? So that eventually brought me to Baby to Baby. We're an organization that provides essentials to children living in poverty. We distribute about 1 million items a week across the country. And most recently, we've been sort of exploring some overseas responses. But I think that this is such an overlooked part of children's rights. There's actually been studies that have proven that children who grow up in diaper poverty or with diaper need actually have developmental issues as they get older. They have trauma from really growing up without these essentials they need. So even something as simple as like the right to play, children literally have an international legal right to play. And you will be in refugee camps or shelters for unaccompanied minors, and you won't see a toy or a book or anything for them to just be a kid. So So I think part of Baby to Baby's mission is to realize these situations where children take this back seat, and for us to be the advocates to make sure they're not forgotten. So even with Hurricane Ian, Red Cross right now has 400 shelters open. They don't count children in a single Red Cross shelter. So how then can Red Cross be meeting their needs if they don't even know how many children are in these shelters? Like, I think Wednesday night there were 30,000 people in shelters. So Baby to Baby knows that 30,000 number doesn't even include children. So then you're assuming that has to be double once you add in a family with 2 kids, and obviously, especially families in poverty have more, 3 or 4. So we're just those advocates to make sure they get what they need, whether that's diapers or formula with the formula crisis, toys, hygiene items, clothing, all of that.
Thank you. I just want to hug everybody. But you're pointing out the international, the internationally protected legal right to play is a nice segue. I wanted to kind of root us a little bit in the law, in your legal universe, kind of the statutes or conventions or things that sort of dictate how you advocate for your respective clients. Shantel, there's hours upon hours that we can talk about in terms of the legal landscape for immigration. It's a particularly dynamic area. It has been particularly fast-moving and dramatic in terms of policy shifts across administrations. I was wondering if you could give us the lightning round, if it could even possibly exist, of Flores, maybe TVPRA, DACA, the kinds of things that you're dealing with in a very, very difficult, fast-moving legal landscape.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to focus on the unaccompanied children because immigration law is big, and I did pay attention, but not that much in law school. Also, I should say I'm not an immigration attorney, although I feel like I am these days. But so the way that it kind of works for the unaccompanied children population, they're designated if a child shows up and comes in whatever way that they come, show up at the border because of a settlement that came out of a Supreme Court decision, which you guys have all of it if you want to read it, Reno Flores, and then eventually turned into a settlement agreement. We call it the Flores Agreement, still under settlement, and so lots of changes that you can also read about. Because of that, the concept of an unaccompanied children it was kind of created in later in statute, and so these children are treated differently in terms of where they end up. But under federal immigration law, children are not children. And so that's a really important piece to understand. So children, all the same laws of federal law and immigration and removal proceedings apply to them. So fast forward, there is a settlement agreement in 1997, Flores, that gives protections for children, unaccompanied children that are in shelters, with the obligation of the government to release these children to family members when possible. And so there's a whole host of protections that need to happen. So from that, moving forward a little bit more, the Young Center started in 2004. It started out of a law clinic in Chicago with the idea that in immigration law, because children are not necessarily children, there is no concept of a best interest standard. In federal law, best interest standards do not exist in immigration law. And so in dependency court or delinquency and all other areas of state law, the best interest standard is in statute, but in federal law it's not. And so the idea of the Young Center was, since it doesn't exist, how can we utilize state child welfare law, the good ones, the good parts of it? How can we use the best interest standard? How can we utilize international human rights law? How can we just utilize humanity? And all of those things, since it's all discretionary in removal proceedings. And so that's really where the Young Center started. It started out of a law school clinic. Soon social workers came in, and so over those many years, it started with one clinic, and now we're 8 offices serving the entire Office of Refugee Resettlement network. In 2008, in federal statute, they codified a lot of the sections of the Flores Settlement Agreement in the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act of 2008. It's very broad, it does a lot of things, but one of the most important things it does for me, my salary, and for all the work that we do, is it created the role of the child advocate. This is something that our founding director wanted to make sure that immigration officials in removal proceedings and in care and custody understood that the best interest should be considered. And so now they exist, and we're independent. You can read about it, or you can be a volunteer, and they can tell you more about it. That's essentially how we are able to do the work. And so as an external child advocate in statute, we are able to advocate for the child. We are not part of the legal team, they also do have attorneys, although there is no right necessarily. The government does not have to fund attorneys for these children. Part of the Flores settlement also gave them access to have attorneys, and currently the Vera Institute and other entities are funding legal service providers for most of the children in these unaccompanied children. So they have their immigration attorneys. They're in custody, so they have, social workers and clinicians and all sorts. They're all in removal proceedings because while they're in shelter, they're also placed into removal proceedings, and so they're particularly vulnerable. While everyone's trying to get them somewhere safe while they fight their immigration case, and so our role as the child advocate is to serve as somewhat similar to a guardian ad litem, similar to a CASA, if any of you have heard court-appointed special advocates, except the big difference here is we don't get appointed by the court, we get appointed by the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is a part of the Health and Human Services. So when a child comes, Customs and Border Patrol puts them in a shelter, they're designated unaccompanied, they now get diverted to the Health and Human Services, and then they are in the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement and cared for. So it's a complex system, multiple areas, and kids, we will join them at any point in their journey to be by their side. And our role is to advocate for them and make sure that best interest lens, and we write that, we don't call them briefs, but we call them best interest determinations, reports, where we will make recommendations to immigration court, recommendations to the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Through statute, we're also able to access government staffing, so all of the staffings when they're talking about the kids, all of their records without redaction. And so we're able to do the type of advocacy because we have access to everything. We are not decision makers, we are there to make recommendations as an independent third party, and we are 100% child-led. And so as long as we use it, UNHCR best interest paradigm, that I actually give you guys a copy of so you can take a look at what that means, but it's always about what does the child want, which often is different than what does the child need, what does the child want, and really looking at best interest, which is sometimes different than their expressed interest, which is interesting for a lawyer because
And for a judge.
And for pretty much everyone, and as a lawyer, complicated. And so what that means is sometimes there are situations when we're advocating for the best interest of the child, but their legal service provider, their immigration attorney, has to do what the child wants. But I know if we send this child back to Mexico like she wants to, she will get killed the day she gets there. So trying to figure out the ethical implications of that. And so the role of the child advocate is to make sure that the child's voice is heard for all decision makers in whatever way that looks like, and advocate at every decision maker, and make sure that the child always has access to someone. And the volunteer is the person who does that through their one-on-one interactions. So that is a little bit about law and a little bit about the Center.
I want to encourage you to take a breath and a sip of water. That was so helpful. So helpful. I wanted to ask you, Debra, now too, right? To kind of maybe share some of these thorny legal issues that you deal with, right? There's the codes and laws that ought to apply, and then there's in practice what you have to deal with and what shows up in your courtroom and how you navigate those things. What are kind of the thorny or legal issues that you're dealing with as a judge, and how have those changed in 12 to 18 months, let's say?
Well, we are governed by the Welfare and Institutions Code. We use a separate set of laws in the children's court than, for example, when I was in the criminal world, it was the penal code. So we use the Welfare and Institutions Code is what governs children dependency court statutes. One of the big issues that's going to be coming in front of the Supreme Court, I believe in November, there's a lot of upheaval, if you will, in the Indian Child Welfare Act. And many of you probably don't know anything about this, and you think, Indian Child Welfare, what is that? I know that's what I said when I got to dependency court. I'm like, Indian Child Welfare Act. I was just doing my DNA, and I wish I would have known all these years ago that I had as much Indian child blood in me that I would have gone to Harvard instead of Western State. But anyway, what happens is every child that comes to the children's court, we have to inquire of the parents if they have parents. Sometimes they don't. Or sometimes we have a child who we know who the birth mother is, but we don't know who the father is necessarily. But every child that comes into dependency court, an inquiry is made as to whether or not there is any Native American ethnicity, ancestry, heritage, etc. And because the federal government is now attempting to make amends to what has happened based on the past history, And there is an opportunity, if you want to look at it that way, to try to reach back now into the future and make sure that people that have Native American or American Indian ancestry or heritage are accounted for. So every single child has to be accounted for. And by and large, most children do not have this ancestry, but every once in a while, I had this in court yesterday, someone will say, oh yeah, I was told that my paternal great-grandfather was a member of the Apache tribe in New Mexico. So what happens now is the Department of Children and Family Services has to talk to extended family and relatives to try to determine whether or not there was any kind of, we'll call it a tribal affiliation. Well, there's at least 10 or 12 different bands of Apache in New Mexico, or like the Cherokee Nation. There are many bands and substrata within the Cherokee Nation. So this is a huge issue which is actually causing a lot of work for us in the courts and for the appellate courts, because one division of the appellate court views the law differently than another division, and then there's fighting within the divisions, and I'm constantly getting updates on this. So I have to make sure that the Department of Children and Family Services and County Council is looking at that area. But that applies to every single case that's coming in. I'm getting cases sent back to me reversed on appeal, for example, where I terminated a parent's rights, which I was within my purview to do. The Court of Appeal says, okay, Judge Archuleta, we agree with you. However, someone needs to double check that great-great-great-great-grandmother wasn't a member of the Mescalero Apache tribe. And so this is an ongoing issue. The hardest thing for me as a judge in dependency court, in addition to removing children from parents, because many times they do get to go back, is terminating parental rights. Okay, that's the killer. When I have to terminate parental rights, it goes to the best interests of the child. There are very specific timelines and deadlines that parents have an opportunity to get services, to engage in the coursework, the domestic violence, the drug counseling, the mental health, the family counseling, whatever it is that I as the judge order. But many times, for a variety of reasons, these parents cannot comply with the court orders. And when these parents come to me, I try not to look at them in a punitive manner. I try to look at them as a human being. Okay, these are mothers and fathers that are struggling. As I was saying at lunch earlier, my daughter has had a very fancy life. And there were days when I was college educated and a working mom with kids. My husband has a master's degree from USC, but we don't hold that against him. Okay, we were like college educated professional parents, ripping our hair out trying to deal with two little kids. When I was in trial, she was sick, or someone, got a bee sting at school, or, the wash machine was overflowing. And I tried, not everybody, I was lucky to have those problems, but I have families that come before me that don't have shelter, the kids are out of school, they don't have laptops, they don't have Wi-Fi, they don't speak English, they don't have access to medical care, food, whatever. So I have to look at each parent and each family individually. And I have to tell you that the thing that weighs on me is when I have to terminate a parent's rights. But I only have to, every single decision I make is appealed. Every single decision I make is appealed. But when I have to decide that it's in the best interest of the child, that this child needs permanency and stability. Some of these kids are taken away at birth, they don't even know their parents. I can't imagine, because I'm a mom myself, what that must be like. I was saying at lunch, one of the first cases I had was a woman who delivered her 10th drug-addicted child at Harvard, UCLA. All 9 of her previous kids had been removed from her because they were all drug-addicted. I mean, I love my daughter more than my own life. So I cannot imagine what it must be like to be in the grip of addiction such that you continue to have these kids that you carry and then you lose them because you're so addicted to methamphetamine or fentanyl. I just can't even imagine what that must be like. And yet I have to look at this woman and try to empathize and think, okay, is this 10th kid, is this gonna be the one that she's finally gonna be able to parent? That's what kills me, is when I have to terminate parental rights. And frankly, more often than not, it's the mothers that are hard for me because, I hate to say it, but a lot of the times the fathers, they weren't really there in the first place. I do have some fathers that do advocate for their children, but by and large, it's the moms. And that's the hard part for me, because I try to talk to these people like just another mom across the table. I empathize with these parents, and I realize I have to make a gut-wrenching decision. but I have to do what's in the best interest of those children because I want to try to put those kids in the best position going forward. Sometimes it's with extended family members, but let's be honest, we have a lot of families where that addiction, that domestic violence, those issues are systemic within that family. Okay, it's not just this one individual, it's the whole clan, if you will. And so I have to do what's in the best interest of those kids to put them in the best position moving forward. There is a book that you should all read if you get some time called Cupcake Brown. It's by Cupcake Brown.
I used to work with her.
I saw that book because I was taking the kids to the beach, and it was like a book. I thought, oh, this will be a great summer read. It had sprinkles on the cover, like, you know, those donut sprinkles.
Yeah.
I bought the book, and I'm like, holy.
Pieces of cake, right?
A piece of cake
The
by Cupcake Brown.
Her name is Cupcake Brown.
Her name is Cupcake. It is. It's called A Piece of Cake. I have it in my chambers. And I thought, oh, this will be a fun summer beach read. I like the cover. It had donut sprinkles on it. And I read the book, and it's an amazing book. There's so many people that have been brought up through the foster care system or been in really bad circumstances and situations. And all I can say is the only thing that keeps me going every day is that I hope that I can go in every single day, no matter what I hear, what I see, and do the right thing so that I can put these kids in the best position moving forward. And the one thing that I really stress, I'm kind of famous for it, among other things, is I want these kids to get their education. I want them to at least get that GED.
Yeah.
And then they're all, well, I'm thinking about going to community college. And I said, you know what? I went to community college. I did. I worked as a legal secretary to put myself through school. I didn't get to go, you know, it's a different story, but I said, well, I went to community college, and they looked at me like, oh, you did? And it's like, yeah. I said, I worked to put myself through a community college. And so I only share that with them because I want them to know that anything's possible. If I can do it, I was no genius. I birthed genius kids.
Obviously.
My son particularly. But, you know what? These kids can do anything. And I want to inspire and instill that in them, that they can do anything. And I keep a sponge on my bench. My grandmother was a cleaning lady with a third grade education that was born in New Mexico, and English was not her first language. And she scrubbed toilets, and she changed diapers. And I'm her granddaughter. I'm sitting here as a judge. So I try to tell these kids that, not because I want to pontificate and sound like I know everything. But after raising Alyssa, I do know a little something. So that's all I can say.
Amazing, inspiring, all the way around. Marisa, I want to ask you, we could talk forever. There have been a lot of developments, legal and non-legal, that are going to have huge implications, right, for the future. We have Roe v. Wade, we have homeless crisis, we have climate change and the legislation or lack thereof on something that will, what do you see as the biggest organizational challenge for you in the coming years? And because I refuse to end on doom and gloom, I'm going to ask everybody to come back to this question with the greatest opportunity in your respective advocacy spheres. So be prepared. But
why don't we get the questions ahead of time? I'm just like,
I know, sorry, I haven't to wing it.
That's all right.
Yeah, so I think there's two, pretty big challenges right now. The first one, I think, is the supply chain crisis. Just for us, we've seen the cost of our diapers double. So our $6 million spent diapers has turned into $12 million, which means we now can't serve as many kids. We've seen it with formula. We see it even with hygiene products. It's really across the board. Pack and plays, car seats, the whole thing. I think also overseas, a lot of that is being driven by the war in Ukraine. Just to put this in perspective a little bit, not just with the refugees fleeing Ukraine, but 90 to 95% of the Horn of Africa's wheat comes from the Ukraine and Russia area of the world, and that is exacerbating now the famine in the Horn of Africa. All the supply chain issues, plus that is leading to a huge cost increase in therapeutic food, which they use to treat children who are severely malnourished. It's kind of like an ultra nutritious peanut butter that they give kids. And in Somalia alone, this year, UNICEF is expecting to spend $12 million more just because of that price increase in this peanut butter product. So, and that's in one country. So worldwide, just imagine how those cost increases are going to look. So I think that's made really concerning, and that's piggybacking off of COVID, where everyone's jaded. Like even baby to baby, we've raised less money this year than almost ever. I think everyone's just exhausted. People are tired of donating. They're tired of, all this sad news, and it sort of is the sad reality right now. Costs are going up and people are carrying less, and I think we're caught in the middle of it and trying to figure out how to spend our resources.
Okay, ray of hope, go.
Ray of hope. Ah!
Okay, no, maybe I'll give you some time. Do we have, just out of curiosity, do we have a little extra time since we started late? I only want to get in. Okay.
Yes. Such a lawyer.
It technically goes till 2:10, but there's like a 15-minute break before the next thing starts.
Got it. We'll be cognizant of everyone's
They ended
time.
5 minutes early.
Okay, well, I got the ray of hope.
Let's do it.
Please give it to us.
They're sitting right here.
True. So I did want to, Shantel, I want to get your answer, but then I think it would be great, speaking of, it's a great segue into what do I need to learn in law school in order to do this? What am I definitely not going to learn in law school in order to do this?
Pass the bar.
What did I wish somebody had told me in law school about what I should be doing to set myself up for a career in this kind of space? So I've thrown a bunch of questions at you. Answer them whatever way you want.
You want a ray of hope.
Oh, yeah.
So,
We don't
and
need
all
more
of
doom and
those-
gloom, so
No,
just ray of hope.
I'm gonna give you a case example of less than ray of hope, but then what that then means and the impact, because to me, the children that I work with are the most amazing humans I've ever met, because they have done things and seen things that none of us could ever even imagine, most of us anyways. And yet they stand there every single day and do this. And so also this is my pitch to become a volunteer. So I'm going to share the role of the volunteer and also then share how it ended and then what you need to learn in law school or what you won't learn in law school that you can only learn in doing the stuff. So 2 sisters were from Central America, which is where most of the kids that we work with are coming from. Poverty, were sold by their parents in what we would here call commercial sexual exploitation. There, it's just sharing with the community and for exploitation purposes. They don't have a term for that necessarily. Kids were sold starting at age 5 over and over, and a whole bunch of other atrocities that happened to them, and then eventually were sold here to people in the United States. They were intercepted by Customs and Border Patrol, identified as trafficking situation, and were not released to the intended sponsor, which was actually the trafficker. And then they came separately. The 5-year-old and the 7-year-old were sent different and with different groups. Sorry, this didn't sound gloom or happy, but
I know we'll get there.
They get into the system. They were identified, sent into a bunch of shelters all over the place. Eventually, we got on both of their cases, got both of the sisters together. By then, they were 6 and 8. Got them into. They were eligible under something through the Office of Trafficking in Persons because they were victims of sexual exploitation in home country and then sold here. And so we were able to get them this status and get them into a special program called the Unaccompanied Refugee Minor Program, which is basically kind of like foster care, but a specialized one for refugees, those that have granted legal status, immigration relief, and kids of victims of trafficking. So they got together in this amazing home. And in that process, an attorney reached out to us and said, can you help us on one small thing, but it's never small in this world. They're like, yeah, help us just write this thing. So they wanted us to help in a guardianship to get, it's a very complicated system, but in order to get legal relief and special immigrant juvenile status, which is 90% of our relief claims, you need to go through the probate court. And so here in California, in every state it's different, and I work with 25 states, so I get to learn all of them. But here in California, it's through the probate court. Just write us a brief to support our thing. So we did that, but in that we learned about all of the trafficking, and then they said, can you just write us a letter, a recommendation to support the trafficking visa? Sure. And then they're like, she's in removal proceedings. Can you write us a letter? So anyways, we do all of these different things. But in that process, we decide we're going to put a child advocate on the case. So we get this amazing volunteer child advocate who happens to be a child psychologist who's also an asylum seeker 45 years or 30 years ago, 20, whatever the 80s were. And she connected with her. And she was a child psychologist, so she could have done anything like psychology related. But what she did with this child who had been sold I don't know how many times since the age of 4, she danced with her. This child loved Christian love music. They listened to love music virtually and danced together. They played together. They did vision boards together. They dreamed together. While the attorney was working on all of these other things, but the child wouldn't talk to the attorney. The child would only talk to our volunteer, not even me, but to our volunteer. And so when it was time to actually get her declaration for all of these things, and this is really how the role of the child advocate works and how it can be a really beautiful process and why these children are amazing, is the child was, ready to have to do that, and I didn't want to traumatize her. The attorney said, can you guys get all the information and then I'll come in. And so she did, and then we actually had our volunteer child advocate kind of read through the declaration, and then we wrote a best interest determination too. And in that she said, I'm gonna tell you something I've never told anyone. And she started opening up about all these other things that had happened to her that actually strengthened her claim, got it all for the lawyer, wrote it together. Everything was granted. She moved forward, her kids, sisters together. And when we were closing the case, she said, well, I don't want you to leave, to her advocate. I don't want you to leave, but I understand that I'm in a good place. I have dreams. I see this role model of foster parents. That's who I want to be. I want a red car. I want all these wonderful things that she had seen. She had not ever been a child, but she got to see what that looked like. And so this is the good part. And she said, but I don't want you to leave, and I'm crying right now. But I know there's other kids just like me that have seen and didn't even know that they were worth anything. They were even humans until they met someone like you, and now I know better. So I want you to go help others. And so to me, I mean, there's so many things that we do, and there are a lot more legal stuff that happened behind the scenes, but just to kind of think about the importance of that human connection and what we do and how we do it. So my advice in law school is, truth is, you're never going to learn any of this in law school. So if you know you have an area, take those electives. I opted out of many of the bar classes. You're going to pass the bar. Not the first time, not the second time, but you're going to pass the bar. But definitely you'll never get the chance to take those classes. So I took all the children's rights law classes. I took the immigration. I took every clinic I could possibly take. I took every internship that would get me to go far and do really interesting things. I did everything every activity I could have done in law school that was like not specific to like law review or anything like that. I did it because I knew I couldn't get that opportunity later, and it has, I think, helped me shape where I was going. So all of that, if you're interested in becoming a volunteer, we do trainings twice a year. You can reach out to me. It's also in the how-to, or you can go on our website and just say, I want to be a volunteer. And if you speak another language, that's even better, since about 99% of our youth do speak other languages. The languages we're currently looking for, Dari Farsi, working with our Afghan population. We have a huge Afghan population of unaccompanied Afghan minors that we cannot serve in the way we want to because we don't have enough. A lot of kids from India, Bangladesh, Somalia, Ethiopia, Ghana. And Central America is about most of our kids. So most of them are indigenous speakers with some level of Spanish. So Spanish is a great language for us. But or if you speak any Central American, Mayan, indigenous-based languages, or know anyone. But even if you speak English and just want to do the work, we have a lot of kids, especially our kids coming from Africa, that speak English as well. And so it really just takes a good heart. And you won't get to be a lawyer with them because that won't be your role, but you'll get to see the reason why you want to change laws and make a difference. So yeah, did I cover all the questions?
Yeah, I mean, you're just about it done. Debra, any words of advice for somebody with aspirations to be a judge? I know maybe you didn't necessarily set out to be this way and find yourself in this incredible place, but anything that you wish you knew, or that you can share with our eager lawyers of the future here?
I studied for the bar separately because I found that most of what I learned in law school had nothing to do with passing the bar. And frankly, most of what I learned in law school had nothing to do with the real world.
True.
So you got to follow your passion and pass the bar. And I would follow my passion first, because you will pass the bar. Okay.
Or be an aid worker and don't take the bar.
I was going to ask you, Marisa, also to share, right? We hear frequently, I mean, if you think transactional, instruction is deficient now, like 20 years ago, there was like one clinic, there was a lottery for like 2-3 L's, and you could never get into it. But we always heard, okay, well, law school, you learn kind of how to think. And for somebody who didn't choose to advocate through kind of traditional legal means, what about folks who are kind of coming to law school to get that education, not necessarily interested in having to be a lawyer, but wanting to take that into kind of the larger private sector? Any words of advice for that path, if that's something people are interested in doing?
So I agree with you. I think law school taught me how to make hard decisions. I remember I took Homeland Security, and we had like a simulation where we had vaccines for Ebola or something, and we had to decide who could get the vaccines, and it led to like a really interesting conversation around like humanity and when you are sort of acting as God, how do you play that, and the different kind of like the morality behind all of that. And so I think that's really what I took away with me from law school, and then could always have in the back of my mind as I like navigated the world of humanitarian aid. I think also like my advice is if this is something you want to do, don't let people in law schools like persuade you to go elsewhere. I think there's always so many people doing big law or other things, and it's easy to want to chase the money and all of that. But if you really are passionate about it, I think you'll find quickly that like no dollar amount or prestige or anything could really make you like feel the way that you'll feel by following something that you want to do.
My shameless plug for Big Law is that we do tons of amazing things. but I will
I
say,
could apply government service
right?
because there's a great work-family balance.
right? So, but I will say that that some of the most satisfying work that I've ever done is when we do a ton of work, done a lot of asylum work, and a lot of child advocacy, and it is always the most satisfying work I ever get to do. So whatever path you take, you know, to get here, if this is something that's meaningful for you, I mean, the need is huge, and there are so many different ways, right? We had advocates from all sorts of places, not the spectrum, I guess it's more of a pie of children's advocacy, and just encourage everybody to speak to our wonderful panelists who are doing incredible work in the world, and thank you all for being here.
I can give you my email address if you want to write it down. It's not in here. It's darchuleta@lacourt.org. It's very simple. Or you can contact my #1 PR representative over here. But it's darchuleta@lacourt.org. And just shoot me an email, and I'm happy to answer your questions or, you know, do what I can do to, if you I'd be interested in anything. We do have a child sexual exploitation court in the courtroom. Unfortunately, our proceedings are confidential, but we actually have one courtroom at Edelman dedicated to children of human trafficking, by and large young girls. I'm hearing all this talk about international. Ladies and gentlemen, it's all going on over here in LA County. Okay, so the issues and the concerns that my esteemed colleagues over here are talking about happening internationally, we have it way worse now in LA. So everything that they're talking about, it's going on in our own backyard and under our noses. And all of us in this room, out of this room, and on this campus and in this county should be rolling up our sleeves and pitching in and doing something, because we are having our own crisis here within our own backyards and in our neighborhoods. So I appreciate all the advocacy you're doing internationally, but I don't want people to overlook our own backyard, our own front yard. It's all happening, and it's, you know, it's affecting everybody's quality of life, particularly the kids. You have a question?
Do you also take volunteers like with the dependency court, or?
We can. There are certain situations we can have law students, volunteers come in and watch the proceedings, and so, you know, one of the things, and I'll end this quickly, you know, you were all teenage young women at one point, and I'm sure you never talked out to your mothers particularly. One of the issues that I get is a lot of my lawyers have never like been as old as me and lived, you know, and raised kids. So I'll have someone say, well, you know, that 15-year-old needs to be taken away from her mother because the mother can't control her and she's talking back. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but that's normal human development. That's part of her learning to separate from her mother, and you two are going to learn how to have to navigate this. I'm not going to remove the child and take her away from you, because this is part of the gift that you get, because motherhood is that gift that keeps on giving. But my lawyers don't know that because they're not old enough yet to have raised a teenager, but some of us are in here rolling our eyes and saying, yeah, been there and done that. But what they look at is a child advocacy situation that I need to take mom and daughter apart. It's no, this is just natural. You'll get used to it. You'll learn how to navigate it. Just don't kill each other in the process.
Just can I just piggyback off that really quick?
Of course.
Someone in law school told me, like a mentor, that if you are able to successfully do what you want to do in your own community, you can always expand outside of that. And I think that was such good advice, because I was looking for internships or opportunities in the international sector, and I was sort of ignoring LA. But you're here, and if you can do something in your community, you can always transfer that experience outside. So that's a great point.
Yeah, start local and think global, you know? Yeah. Exactly.
And I'm just going to give my law school professor wisdom advice. My favorite law school professor is no longer here, told me something that has resonated with me in every aspect, so I'm gonna give this to you because she's no longer here and she's awesome. She said, whatever you do, all the stuff everyone said, and then become an expert at it. Doesn't matter what it is, but become the best at it that you can possibly be, because no one else could be as good as you. So you are able to speak about it, train about it, do everything about it. And she told me that as I was prepping for a fellowship interview. And I remember my second day in my fellowship, I remember her, and they asked me to train. And so I trained all these judges, and everybody was over 70, every single one of them in there. I walked in, she told me to train until I become an expert. So by day 2, I trained, and I never stopped training over and over and over until I became an expert in what I was doing before, in education law and dependency and delinquency, and now in a new area of law. But it's all the same. Become an expert in whatever it is that you're going to do, and become indispensable in as an expert. So I thought that was really great advice, and yeah, I leave that with you guys as well.
I don't want to foreclose Q&A, but if we're good and people need to go, I just want to say thank you again for participating. Thank you